Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all three of you for being here today, and especially for General Milley. Thank you very much for your 43 years of continuous service. I extend to you my thanks and respect. For Secretary Austin, investments in the military's infrastructure are directly correlated to our readiness and ability to execute deterrence. However, as the people of Hawaii saw from the disaster at Red Hill, military infrastructure also impacts our cities and towns. Fuel, chemical, and sewage spills have lasting impacts on our lands and erode the trust of service members and their communities. We must invest in the systems they rely on each day, basic things like pipelines, power grids, and barracks. Yet this year in Hawaii alone, there is over $500 million in unfunded infrastructure improvements on the service's unfunded priorities list. Secretary Austin, how is the department ensuring that infrastructure maintenance and modernization needs are met before disasters like Red Hill occur? And basically, don't we need to get more of these projects off unfunded priorities lists?
These are, to your point, Senator, requirements that are critical, and they should be met as soon as possible. In my budget, I've asked for $5.1 billion to increase operational effectiveness and survivability. Now, part of that has to do with the effects that are caused by climate, but nonetheless, you know, those effects are real effects, and so we will continue to invest in this. But to your point, services should invest in this to make sure that the infrastructure they need to support them is in fact, you know, first rate. So.
Secretary Austin, you know that I have been very much focused on those kinds of infrastructure needs. What comes out of our pipes? So with the electricity staying on, those continue to capture my attention, and be assured that I will continue to focus on these issues and the needs being met. Mr. Secretary, in your tenure, you have issued several policies that increase service members' access to child care, which you have mentioned, institute parental leave, which is very popular, and ensure access to reproductive health care for all women, no matter where they are stationed. These are prudent changes that put our people first, and I appreciate your leadership on these issues. Secretary Austin, how did you identify these service member needs? And once those requirements were record, what was the process to implement updated policies?
Well, I talk to our troops. I talk to the family members. You know, as I go around the country and around the world, you know, I'm very much interested in what their challenges are and how we can do things to make life better for them. And with your help, we've been able to do some things. And that includes the things that you've mentioned, Senator, but also the pay raises, the raise in BAH and BAS. And we're asking you for another pay raise this year, probably the biggest pay raise for our troops and civilians in decades. But that's how I get the input, by engaging the troops and the family members.
You have been heavily criticized for your decisions to enable particularly women service members to attain reproductive health. And I, for one, commend you for that. And I want you to stay the course. In the same vein of wanting to support our service members, I do want to mention that there is the potential for significant cuts to the cost of living of Hawaii service members. And I've noted this before. And I think that these huge cuts for Hawaii service members are unjust and unfair. And I hope that there will be a reconsideration of that decision. I also want to note, I have been asking about missile defense of Hawaii for quite some time. I had a productive meeting yesterday with leaders from your staff about their roles in and plans for the current and future missile defense of Hawaii. While there is certainly more work to be done to establish and execute a long-term plan for the missile defense of Hawaii, I am encouraged to see the department treating this issue with the seriousness it demands. I remain focused on it, on the issue, as I request updates from your staff. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to state for the record that I am adamantly opposed to the DOD's new policy on allowing travel expenses for those that are going to other states to seek abortions. I think it's incredibly important that we remain adherent to the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits taxpayer dollars from going towards abortions. I know this is an extension of travel services for family members and those service members, but again, those are taxpayer dollars being spent to fund the extension of an abortion. I am adamantly opposed. I know that there are others that are on this committee that agree as well. We're not saying that women can't seek abortions. They can do that, but that is to be privately funded. So thank you both, gentlemen, for being here this morning. And Secretary, I do worry that there's a mismatch between strategy and resources at the heart of the president's budget. The National Defense Strategy calls this a, quote, decisive decade and commits to act urgently to strengthen deterrence against the pacing threat, China. So, General Milley, would investments in posture presence and lethal capabilities like long-range fires reduce our risk in the Western Pacific?
Absolutely. Long-range fires would reduce our risk, not only Western Pacific, but anywhere, but for sure, yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, General Milley. So I know that you addressed this with Senator Rounds, but Secretary Austin, as we discuss those unfunded requirements, we see that we are $3.5 billion short in the Indo-PACOM, which includes critical strike capabilities and posture enhancements. So I do hope that this is something we can work with those commanders on those requirements. I think it's incredibly important, and I know my colleague from Alaska may address requirements in defending Taiwan, but it is incredibly important. If we are saying in the National Defense Strategy that this is a decisive decade, we need to act accordingly, and as Congress, we must fund accordingly. Chairman Milley, as you know, our Special Operations Forces are a strategic capability, and how can SOF help deter and defeat great power competitors?
Well, for Special Forces, regardless of theater, relative to a great power competitor, there's ongoing intense competition in the so-called gray space. They play a key role in that area. In addition to that, they can provide tremendous capability in train, advise, assist in indigenous partners and allies in region. That's important. Also, I would argue that irregular warfare is often an overlooked component, and as you start looking at larger conventional war, irregular warfare plays a very key role in all forms of war, and that will play a key role in any great power war as well. So those are some of the key things. There's strategic reconnaissance, there's the development of the battle space, advanced force operations, the whole litmus test or a litany of capabilities that Special Operations Forces bring that have a direct role prior to the onset of hostilities and can contribute to the deterrence of war with any great power.
Very good, and I appreciate that because you answered my next question about surrogate forces and partnering with those forces, indigenous actors, and they do help SOF compete against great powers, so I do appreciate that. Secretary Austin, will the department's guidance to the SOF enterprise place our great power competition above counterterrorism and crisis response missions?
I'm sorry, Senator, I missed the question there.
Yes, SOF, as it applies to great power competition, will you be placing their mission with great power competition over the other mission of deterring terrorism?
We have to strike a balance, and we see our SOF forces doing that. I know you've talked to our Special Operations Force combatant commander. He is looking at this in a very methodical way and making sure that he maintains a balance of capability that can serve both challenges there, and they're doing a great job. And I've seen some of our Tier 1 forces very rapidly transition and start thinking about how they're going to be relevant, not just thinking about it, but developing capability to be relevant in great power competition. At the same time, keeping a good handle on transnational terrorist organizations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's incredibly important that we continue to fund our SOF as necessary because they do strike a balance between great power competition, working in that gray zone, and also deterring terrorism around the globe. So I would just encourage members of this committee to continue to focus on the strength within our SOF forces. Chairman Milley, thank you very much for your service to our great United States Army as well as the Joint Force, and also my best wishes to Holly Ann. We know that behind every great leader is someone who supports them thoroughly, and she has been a tremendous force in working with our Gold Star families, with all of the members of their service and their families. So my best wishes to you and your entire family. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. General Milley, I also want to compliment you on your stellar career, and I also offer the congratulations of your college classmate, my wife Ann, who I mentioned I would see you today, and she wanted me to extend her congratulations as well. On the 15th of the month, during our Personnel Subcommittee hearing, Senator Kelly and I asked Secretaries Cisneros and Martinez-Lopez about implementation of the Brandon Act. I appreciate both of you in your opening statements talked about the need to get a hold of military suicide issues and resources that are being devoted to this. We asked the secretaries about Brandon Act implementation and also about a report on Brandon Act implementation that we were supposed to receive that is overdue. I don't really want to get into that with you here today, but just to put it on the radar screen that during the course of the development of the NDAA, we really want to get into the implementation of the Brandon Act that we passed, make sure that it's being implemented, find out if there are things we can do to make that implementation easier. And I really want to work on that between now and the time that we take up the NDAA in committee. It's possible that we don't need to do anything more on that space if we're convinced that implementation is moving out. If we're not convinced of that, we'll need to do more. And I just wanted to kind of put that on the record to begin. Secretary, I also want to ask you about your recent trip to Iraq. I think it was either 2 or 3 weeks ago that you were there, and the reports suggest you had productive meetings both with political leadership, Prime Minister al-Sudani, but also with military leadership. Could you describe that visit for the committee?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that our troops are doing well there, and they are enabling and helping their hosts, the Iraqi security forces, and they're very much valued by the Iraqi leadership. The Prime Minister was very complimentary of their performance and the value that they add. Good meeting with the Prime Minister and his leadership. I think it's not only me, but other leaders in the region are also saying that the Prime Minister shows a lot of promise in terms of a person that's willing to work with others to move things forward. So.
Describe the current state of the mill-to-mill relationship. Talking about the Prime Minister discussions, but we've got about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq. As you point out, we are being hosted. We are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government because they value the United States as a partner. Describe a little bit about the current mill-to-mill relationship.
I think the mill-to-mill relationship, Senator, is good, really good. And again, I think our partners understand the value that we add to their overall effort. And if you unplug that, then what happens with their efforts to maintain pressure on ISIS, what happens with their efforts to continue to develop their professional force. And so I think we're very much appreciated, and what I saw was goodness. I think the commander there is doing all of the right things and working in conjunction with the ambassador to continue to move things forward. So I was really encouraged by what I saw.
You've had a number of chapters in Iraq in 2003, and then in 2010, and then as CENTCOM commander. And some of these chapters are with an Iraq that was an adversary of the United States. How would you characterize this relationship? We're there at their invitation, and now we seem to be working in partnership to help them advance security in their country and in the region.
It truly is remarkable, and you cheated me on one of the rotations there. I had 3 rotations to Iraq. But,
I left one out?
You know, this is something that has developed over time, and it's developed in a very meaningful way. It hadn't always been easy. It's been lumpy from time to time. But I think we're in a pretty good place now, and this is something that we're going to have to work on each and every day. And we know, Senator, that not every person in Iraq believes that, you know, that Americans ought to be there, but the government is very much appreciative of what we bring and what we're doing to train and enable their forces. So, you know, I think we're in a pretty good place.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. I think that's important. One of the capacities the U.S. has shown throughout our history is to use a biblical phrase, to beat a sword into a plowshare, to take a nation that was an enemy, and over time, and as you point out, bumpy, not always smooth, but over time, turn the relationship into one of partnership, not one of being an adversary. And that's an important aspect of the U.S.-Iraq relationship, and it also sends a message to others that's something that the United States can do and we can be proud of. I appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Kane. Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both, all three, for your service. A special thank you, General Milley, for your decades of service. I want to jump down to talking back about Ukraine a little bit. There have been a lot of reasons, rationale, excuses, perhaps, for not providing certain advanced weapon systems, some legitimate, I'm sure, maybe all of them, I don't know. But of course, oftentimes it leads to eventually providing them. But one system we've never offered, and I haven't heard a lot of talk about it, are the MQ-9s. But seeing how we just lost one recently in the Black Sea, where it's probably more likely to be recovered by Russia than the United States, and the fact that the Air Force wants to retire 48 older MQ-9s, is there any chance that the MQ-9 would be a reasonable system to offer Ukraine? Either one, or maybe start with Secretary Austin.
Yeah, as we look at this, Senator, as you know, that air domain is a very hostile airspace because of the capability that the Russians have for air defense, and it is not a survivable platform if they try to use that in that environment.
General Milley, you'd agree?
Yeah, that's number one. It's not survivable. It's big and slow. It's going to get nailed by the Russian air defense systems. And in terms of its capabilities, I'm not sure what it'll get you beyond the smaller, faster, more nimble UAV systems that we are providing, as well as some other countries are providing. So I think that it's a good system for certain uses in certain environments, but in the current situation in Ukraine, it may not be the best system.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, I want to now go to back to China a little bit. And you're probably familiar with what I consider the nearly year and a half of torment that the city of Grand Forks went through while considering an investment by the Chinese Communist Party investors of Fufang, which would have provided a wet corn milling facility 12 miles from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, 12 miles from the 319th Reconnaissance Wing, and now an SDA ground station for low Earth orbiting satellites. After sort of cutting a deal and then going to CFIUS, where CFIUS spent 60 days determining they didn't have jurisdiction, and finally, after, I don't know, 14 months or so of all of this, the Air Force finally came out and said it would present a significant risk, and that, I think, has helped kill the project, although I understand there's now a 90-day pause. My hope for all of that is not only that Grand Forks avoided an unfortunate situation, but that many other communities might avoid it as well. Could you talk to us just a little bit about either in the context of Fufang and Grand Forks or the broader context of, are we giving adequate cover and information and coaching perhaps to other communities around the country? Because it's my understanding that this is not necessarily a unique circumstance to Grand Forks.
Well, first of all, Senator, let me thank you for your personal leadership on this issue. To the point that you're making, this applies to installations all around the United States of America. And we will continue to emphasize to service chiefs, commanders, secretaries, that we have to be vigilant about what's going on outside of our fences. We got to work with with the communities to make sure that we do have some kind of situational awareness, and we have to advocate for the protection of our, our bases and installations. And again, every one of these cases will be complex, but there are cases that we must take on. But thanks for your leadership in this area.
Well, I appreciate you saying it that way, actually, because I think you're right. I think we need to, quote, take them on, and rather than sort of punt them to the CFIUS process or some other political process, particularly when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party and their involvement and their ability, not just ability, but obvious willingness to do recon in all sorts of manners and ways, and so I appreciate that. And my hope, like I said, is that the experience that Grand Forks went through is not just in vain to the rest of the country, but rather that perhaps sheds a light on this issue throughout the country. So thank you for that. And again, thank you, General Milley, for your decades of service, and I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your service to our nation. This year's Department of Defense requests an $842 billion budget, one of the largest budgets in history. Now, despite the massive size of this budget request, the committee is already receiving letters from various parts of DOD saying that they need billions of dollars more. DOD calls these unfunded priority lists. I call them wish lists, and I'm concerned about how they distort our budget process. So, Secretary Austin, if I could, let me ask this directly. Are you comfortable with the figure in the President's proposed budget that it is sufficient to meet our defense and national security objectives?
I am, Senator. As you know, we made this budget request based upon our strategy. Our request is directly linked to the capabilities that we need to execute our strategy. And we spent a lot of time on that. I've asked the commanders and service chiefs to make sure that they go after warfighting capability and readiness in their base budget. And for the most part, we've done that. But again, we are required by law.
I understand. So we're going to go there. We're going to go there, Mr. Secretary. Now, Secretary Gates understood that leaders at DOD can always find a gap or a requirement to justify asking for what he called however many billions dollars more you want. He reduced wish lists by about 90%, and he was able to do this during the surge in Afghanistan. Secretary Austin, you have a unique perspective here because before you were Secretary of Defense, you were the commander of a major combatant command, a job that is now held by the people who are asking for unfunded priorities. When Secretary Gates cut these unfunded lists down, you were commanding general of U.S. forces in Iraq. Secretary Austin, did our national security suffer when Secretary Gates cut down the service wish lists?
I can say that, while we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, we, based upon support of Congress, we had what we needed to be able to prosecute our operations. And so we didn't go we didn't want for much of anything. So.
Okay, so let's talk then about the budget process. Each combatant commander thinks about how they could spend more money than you have allocated to them in this process that you describe. I assume these combatant commanders act in absolute good faith, but they have a narrow perspective. Secretary Austin, in putting together the overall budget, you have to weigh our global national security priorities. Do the commanders submitting these wish lists have to do the same?
They are primarily focused on their region and what they would like to have for their region in order to be successful. So, but again,
I take that as a no.
Right.
Yeah, all right. As my colleagues on this committee are well aware, I've been using these budget posture hearings to ask combatant commanders, folks who occupy the roles like the one you used to serve, about these lists, and almost all of them have defended their requests, although the justifications vary. 3 of them said they needed the items on this list to address unexpected threats that couldn't be considered in the budget process. But these same commanders often repeat the same requests year after year after year, suggesting that if there were a real need, they would have worked it into the underlying budget. Secretary Austin, does DoD have sufficient tools to address emerging threats without relying on the unfunded priorities list?
We do, and again, we account for that as we built the budget.
Okay, and one last question. Do you support removing the statutory requirement to send Congress these lists every year? And if so, are you confident that we could do so without jeopardizing national security?
I would support that, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I would also like to submit a letter for the record from Undersecretary McCord supporting my bill with Senator King, Senator Lee, and Senator Braun to end the statutory requirement for these lists. As he notes in the letter, these lists are, quote, not an effective way to illuminate our joint priorities. We don't let any other part of federal government behave this way, and it is for a good reason. The budget process requires making tough choices. I appreciate that the Secretary leads in that, and I would like to submit this for the record, Mr.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Secretary Austin, thank you for your service and your call last week. Secretary McCord, thanks for being here today. Not getting a lot of questions, but thank you for being here. You know, I ran for Senate to serve on this committee. I ran because my dad, he was a World War II veteran. He earned 5 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart, and he died on active duty. And I ran to support the warfighter. You know, we owe our freedom to our troops. For 50 years, our all-volunteer force has answered the call. I think you would agree to that. Since 1973, we've asked a lot of our Americans, young volunteers, to fight in Vietnam, Grenada, Bosnia, Somalia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan. They've never wavered. In boom times and in bust, young Americans have raised their right hands to defend the Constitution with their lives, if necessary. War is hell. You know that better than anybody. Every recruit should know that. But in the last 2 years, we put them through a different kind of hell. In one of your first acts, Mr. Secretary, you put our military, every single member, active duty and reserve, through a mandatory training to root out extremists. That sent a message, Mr. Secretary, that our military is filled with extremists. Our military is one of the most diverse organizations in the world. It is full of patriots. 8 months later, we watched the collapse of Afghanistan. It was the worst defeat of the United States in my lifetime, and agony for most Americans to watch on the 20th anniversary of September the 11th. That defeat gutted our troops who served there. The President called it an extraordinary success. That's not what our veterans of Afghanistan call it. Our withdrawal, a big letdown to our allies, a military disaster, and national disgrace. I've talked to leaders all over the world. They've told me the same thing. Not one general or political appointee has been held accountable. Now, I want to give you an example of accountability. General Milley, May 2021, I sent you a letter asking for, why did we give up Bagram? Now, you did answer, but it was a few months later. Now, you have 4,500 people, you know, for the next person in line on the joint staff and a budget of $250 million. We've got to find ways to get information back to Congress. Secretary Austin, I sent you a question in September 2021 that took almost 4 months. Congress deserves better. America deserves better. We all deserve better. Now we're on the brink of a world war with Russia. China is openly violating our airspace, but it took Congress to step in and tell our military leaders, you, to stop throwing our troops out who objected to a vaccine, most of them on a religious factor. Given what we put our troops through in the past 2 years, it's no wonder that the Army missed its goal of 15,000 soldiers. Now, General, you know that is an entire division. We can't afford that. And it's getting worse. The Navy and Air Force will probably miss their numbers this year. Yet some of my colleagues claim that the real crisis is my hold on the promotion of 158 general flag officers. Mind you, These are promotions that the majority leader can bring to the floor at any time. Those same people claim expanding abortion will make our military stronger. You know, I want to be clear on this. My hold has nothing to do with the Supreme Court's decision to the access of abortion. This is about not forcing the taxpayers of this country to fund abortion. That's been a bipartisan consensus for more than 40 years. The military has performed abortions for years. All were cases of rape, incest, and the harm to the mom. Over the past 40 years, I don't recall one military person ever complaining that we weren't performing enough abortions. Nor did the military raise the alarm that our servicemen and women were being placed in areas that had restrictive policies on abortion. Poland's restrictive policies, Japan, Djibouti, all these theaters have abortion policies. Yet our military changed the policy to do this job in these different theaters. As of 12 days ago, y'all got the American taxpayer on the hook to pay for travel and time off for elective abortions. And you did not make this with anybody in this room or Congress taking a vote. In fact, this contradicts what Congress has actually voted for. Most of us, some of us in the room, if not all senators that have been complaining about this, have voted for the Hyde Amendment many, many times. But now my colleagues on the left think this abortion issue is good for a campaign, and that's what this shouldn't be about. I'm not going to let our military be politicized. I want our military to be the strongest and the deadliest it has ever been, but I also want the administration to follow the law. As long as I have a voice in this body, Congress will write the laws, not the Secretary of Defense, not the Joint Chiefs. General, you said nothing's more expensive than preparing for war or fighting a war. I truly agree. That's the reason if we want something to spend money on, let's pass it and let's put it in the NDAA. You know, I represent Alabama, but I also represent everybody in this country. Everybody, all 320 million. All of us do. Y'all represent the military, but you also are responsible and represent every citizen in this country. That's the reason this country is so strong. And we all need to understand that, get on the same page. I'm willing to work with you. I'm not here to fight. Hey, I'm here, we're all on the same team. And I want to work with you to make this happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think it's appropriate that the Secretary or the General have a
Sure.
reason to respond.
Well, thank you, sir. And first of all, let me just say thanks for the support you've given us to this point. And I really implore you to reconsider and allow our nominations to move forward. It will make a significant difference for our force. Just to address a couple of things that you mentioned. First of all, you said that you know, I had our troops focus on rooting out extremism, and nothing could be further from the truth. You know, each of our units, troops, spent a couple of hours talking about a number of things. We've always had regulations against extremist behavior. And you've heard me say that 99.9% of our troops are focused on the right things each and every day. But in this case, a small set of actions can have outsized impact. On the vaccine mandate, the vaccine mandate, in my view, saved lives. And it saved a lot of lives. And so, you know, we don't see a strong correlation between vaccine mandate and recruiting. We don't see that because we've done the surveys that indicate that that's just not true. There's not a strong correlation. Now, on the issue of providing non-covered reproductive health care for our women, I would just say, Senator, almost 1 in 5 of our troops are women. And they don't get a chance to choose where they're stationed. So almost 80,000 of our women are stationed in places where they don't have access to non-covered reproductive health care. And I heard from our troops, I heard from our senior leaders, I heard from our chiefs and also our secretaries and this policy is based on strong legal grounds. And it is not a law, it is a policy. And so, you know, we obviously don't pass laws in the Department of Defense, but again, I assure you that we have great respect for this body, Congress, and we will do everything within our power to make sure that we continue to work with Congress. Again, you supported us in a number of ways, Senator. I am personally grateful for that support, and I know my colleagues are as well, but thank you.
Let me recognize Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for your service and for being here today to testify. I first want to say to General Milley, I want to take a moment to thank you for your 43 years of service, the commitment to our country, and the dedication and sacrifice your family has made for that with you able to serve. And I look forward to you having enjoyment in retirement and your second career. I know whatever it'll be something special, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Secretary Austin, multiple sources, including retired general officers and National Defense Industrial Association, American Enterprise Institute, and your colleague, Mr. McCord, have all recognized the damage failing to pass a budget on time has both in our national security and the taxpayers. What I'm trying to get to, and Mr. McCord, no one knows better than you how damaging delays in CRs have they been. Previously, you noted that from fiscal year 91 to 2010, the average delay for defense appropriation was 29 days. That was between 1991 and 2010. And that has since ballooned out to 118 days. Also, we're talking about the American Enterprise Institute. They threw out a rough estimate of $200 million per day, $200 million per day, under the latest continuing resolution that covered the start of fiscal year 2023. That has a total of $18 billion. So I guess what I'm asking is both of yours and Mr. McCord's commitment to get Congress, all of you, to do accurate. I mean, I know you come in here and you preach to high heavens, and we seem to not take it seriously at all. We're talking real dollars now, real dollars. And they think that basically the budget keeps ballooning out of sight, and we have no oversight whatsoever. If we, as Congress, just did our job on time, we're told that overall you could save anywhere between 5 to 10% of the request you have. That's $40 to $80 billion a year. Is that an accurate statement?
I think so. I defer to Secretary McCord for exact figures.
We'll let him respond also.
But you're absolutely right, Senator, and you heard me say in my opening statement that the best way that Congress can help us in this year going forward is to try to get an on-time appropriation done. Without that, we can't do new starts, we can't do a number of things, and you can't get that time back. It's gone, and so that puts us further behind in terms of our competition with adversaries like China.
Mr. Secretary McCord?
Yeah, I would concur. Your figures are accurate, Senator. And as the Secretary said, we can't buy back time with money, and that goes on the readiness side if a missed training rotation due to shortage of funds. But it's especially harmful on the contracting side when we've got areas like the Triad where we're trying to move the bomber into low-rate production. That we can't take those next steps under CRs, as you know, and that's the biggest lost opportunity that comes in moving forward where we're constrained legally.
So basically, we have non-productive money that we are appropriating that's used basically to make up for the inefficiencies of Congress because of our budget process. Without you having to say anything or confirm that, that's what I'm taking away from this little conversation that we've had. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure we do our job on time. You know, by April 1st by law, House and the Senate supposed to have a budget. By April 15th by law, we're supposed to have one reconciled. By September 30th by law, we're supposed to pass. That would change the course of what we're doing, how we're spending right now tremendously, rather than cutting anything, just being efficient. So I would hope that we would all take that seriously. General Milley, as you know, since the beginning of Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, the United States has provided over $76 billion in justified funding to support Ukraine in both the military defense of their people and freedom, but also in humanitarian and infrastructure support. Can you speak to your confidence in the U.S. NATO Ukrainian weapons accountability and possibly elaborate on the Joint Strategic Oversight Plan was announced by this year by the Inspector Generals of the DOD, State Department, and U.S.A.I.D. Yeah, they all.
As you know, Senator, we do not have any uniformed troops or civilians, for that matter, accompanying Ukrainian forces in the front line. We do have folks working out of the embassy, so they're working at the Ministry of Defense level, and that's as far as our hands-on accountability goes. We do have some other means through reporting that the Ukrainians report to us, and I'll be happy to talk about that in a classified session, but there are some means and mechanisms of doing some accountability. It is not as rigorous as you might think, but I think the biggest way to measure the accountability is effectiveness on the Russian forces. These anti-tank munitions, this artillery, is having devastating effect on the Russians. As you know, publicly, the Russians have well over 200,000 casualties. Their offensive aspirations have come essentially to a halt. Their capabilities have been, their ground forces have been absolutely impaled on this Ukrainian bayonet, so to speak, and that is largely due to the resources that the United States and other countries have provided. So although we don't have by name DODIC sort of accountability, serial number accountability, you can see the accountability on the battlefield.
Yeah, my time's running out. I'd love to ask you about the AUMF. I'm sure you probably talked about the AUMF before I got here, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Senator Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, and by the way, for both of you, thank you for your service to the country. We really do appreciate it. I do. I know I do. The folks back home do. Secretary Austin, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, sort of along the lines of what Senator Tuberville asked. You mentioned earlier that you didn't want to spend a lot of time, and you thought that it was a drag on our force and spending money on things that don't make us a fighting force. You just mentioned that you don't get the time back. With the stand-down day to address extremism, that cost the military and taxpayers nearly 5.4 million man-hours. And as we talk about recruitment, I think it is completely naive to when we talk about the numbers, to separate the challenges that we have now from the politics, the divisive politics that have been injected now into the military. The military stands as this great meritocracy where people can achieve great things, but by infusing divisive DEI trainings, by infusing abortion politics, by infusing COVID vaccine mandates, it has created division in the ranks, and we have heard from those military members. And I sent you a letter last week, and I want to ask you, we talked about in the letter, referenced the $86.5 million for dedicated diversity and inclusion activities. I want to ask you here today, how many DEI-related positions exist in the Department of Defense?
I can't speak to that specific number. I'll take that question for the record with your permission, Senator.
Sure.
And in terms of that number, it's a small percentage of an $842 billion budget. And I would just further point out with respect to DEI, I think you know, Senator, that Congress requires that we have a DEI program. In the 2020 NDA, it states, the Secretary of Defense shall design and implement a 5-year strategic plan for diversity and inclusion in the Department of Defense.
Yeah, I don't know what these activities are, which is the purpose of the letter. I don't know what materials are being submitted. We looked, so hopefully the response to the letter will in fact be responsive to what actually is being pushed with these so-called trainings. And then I do want to ask you, so there were nearly 17,000, well, there are over 8,000 military men and women who lost their jobs because of the COVID vaccine mandate. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Okay, so we talk about recruitment challenges. Are you actively going after to try to get those 8,000 people back?
They have the ability to
well, right. No, I'm asking, what are your efforts?
They have the ability to reapply for readmission.
Are you recruiting these folks?
I am not recruiting them, but they have the ability.
So sayonara, 8,000 well-trained folks.
We are recruiting new recruits.
Okay. Yeah. And so what happens now to the remaining several thousand who didn't get the vaccine are you intending to fire them as well? There are several folks that weren't immediately dismissed who refused the vaccine. They're still in the military. Are you planning to fire those folks as well?
The vaccine mandate, Senator, has been rescinded.
So you don't, now, even though they were refusing when you did have the policy.
That's right. The
So your
mandate,
commitment here today is those folks are not going to lose their jobs.
not for a vaccine mandate, Senator.
Okay, well, I would submit that
If I could, I'd like to go back to
Sure.
the 5 million hours that you mentioned, and I'd like to ask the chairman who submitted that number, where that number came from.
we'd be happy to back it up. If you take the stand-down day by the number of folks that didn't work that day, that's where we get the numbers. So we'd be happy to follow up specifically. I do have a question.
That's not accurate, Senator.
Okay, well, maybe you can answer. How many man-hours were sacrificed that day? You just testified you can't get those hours back. How many hours were sacrificed on the stand-down day?
Let me ask him to tell you where the numbers came from.
Okay, well, maybe you can get us those numbers when you
Sure.
when you respond to the letter also.
It's as simple as this. You know, when asked to provide that number, his approach was there are 2.1 million troops. Each troop spent 2 hours, and that's where the number comes from.
Okay, well, you can't get the time back, right? Whatever that number was, you can't get that time back.
2 hours for
General Milley, I do want to ask you a question because I'm limited on time. I do want to ask you about the Philippines, which I think you had mentioned in your previous remarks about that strength, that relationship continues to grow, which I personally think is critical in the Indo-Pacific. Can you talk about what some of those efforts, where you think that's headed? I think as we, obviously the allies there talked about the most, Japan, Australia, and India, but I think the Philippines are critical. Could you talk about the strategic value of strengthening that relationship?
I can, Senator, but just point of clarification. It's 2.1 million, 2 hours, you factored 2 hours per person. That's with the 5.4 million. That's out of 2.8 billion man-hours available, factored on a 10-hour workday, 5 days a week for the U.S. military.
Okay, well, whether we're talking about dollars or hours, millions still matter.
No,
the folks that I represent think a million is a big number.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just saying where the math came from. And on the Philippines, but more broadly than the Philippines, generally the Western Pacific. It is my view that China is, you heard it in the opening statement, is trying to become the regional hegemon within perhaps 10 or 15 years or so. And part of that, of course, is putting the Philippines and other countries in the region at a disadvantage. Those countries want the United States presence there. They clearly do. There's really an underreported arms race going on in the Western Pacific right now. These countries are arming themselves up, and they very much, with very few exceptions, want the United States there. That's why the Secretary traveled to the Philippines. That's why we're looking at access basing and oversight. That's why we're looking at a reposturing in the Western Pacific. It is a design there to be forward deployed in order to deter armed conflict with a great power being China in this case, and deter Chinese aggression, not only in the Western Pacific, but perhaps elsewhere. So these are all linked together, tied together. There's many other initiatives ongoing by the services and also by other countries as well. But it's really critical, and it's really critical that we get it done right, and we need to move out with a sense of urgency because the next 5 years, I think, are going to be determinative of really what comes in the future with our relationship with China.
Thank you, General.
Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the three of you, thank you for your testimony here today, and thank you for the work you do. I also want to begin by commending the Department's efforts to invest in and incentivize funding to build semiconductor manufacturing facilities and advanced research and development activities at both the national and the regional levels. Undersecretary McCord, could you speak to how the fiscal year 24 DoD budget request takes advantage of the CHIPS Act that Congress passed recently, that funding, and makes the necessary investments to ensure that we have both a resilient and a robust domestic microelectronics manufacturing ecosystem for both state-of-the-art as well as legacy chips?
Thank you, Senator. First, I just want to say that the Department really appreciates congressional leadership on the CHIPS Act. It really speaks to the recognition of the whole of government approach needed with China. CHIPS is separate from our budget in the sense that it's now a standalone authorization. We had, prior to that, in the 22 and 23 budgets, started a pretty robust microelectronics effort under Secretary Austin that was really tied to the defense-specific capabilities like radiation hardening. What we're doing with chips on top of that then is really that broader industrial base, the fabrication, labs to fabs. I understand that that is now, we're now in our request for solutions source selection for the proposals that went out in that first year of chips that Congress created last year. So we're moving out now on source selection to actually build out that capability. And then that, again, that sits on top of the more defense-specific microelectronics, which is over $2 billion in our budget.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, the development of Taiwan's reserve military capacity is without question a key component of ensuring that their military is well prepared to deter and, if needed, defeat a potential PRC invasion of the island. However, I remain concerned that the Department is not sufficiently addressing the hardships that exist at the authority and funding level with increased mill-to-mill and civ-mill interactions between the United States and Taiwan. Current policy restricts the level of interaction that U.S. forces, particularly the National Guard, have with Taiwan, both CONUS and OCONUS. And additionally, current restrictions do not allow the Guard to consistently engage with Taiwan under the same authority that the State Partnership Program utilizes. Rather, other authorities must be utilized to justify and to fund National Guard's involvement in this strategic relationship. Essentially, what it's happening, it's creating this maze of funding and authorities that restricts consistent engagement that's so important. And it creates undue processes and procedures to coordinate and fund cooperation. So my question for you, sir, is how is the Department reassessing the relevant authorities and lines of funding to help streamline the National Guard's ability to support security cooperation efforts with Taiwan?
Yeah, we're taking a hard, thanks, Senator. We're taking a hard look at, you know, all the things that we can do to increase the capability in their reserve forces. You're right, Senator. This is critical for them going forward. Our Guard has done amazing work with other countries across the globe. Most recent example, as you know, is the work that they did in Ukraine prior to this invasion. And so that kind of engagement we think is critical. So we're going to continue to find ways to make sure that we're helping as much as we can in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act. And so we'll relook all of our policies and authorities to make sure that we can streamline this as best possible. In the meantime, we're going to continue to do what we're doing to increase our capability.
Secretary Austin, on Saturday, Russia accused Azerbaijan of violating the ceasefire, which ended the 2020 war with Armenia. This comes as Azerbaijan has blockaded the Lanchin corridor and for more than 3 months, leading to what is a humanitarian crisis in Karabakh. I recently wrote to you and Secretary Blinken regarding the use of Section 907 waiver authority and the potential effects of U.S. support in that conflict. My question for you is: is U.S. military aid supporting the Azerbaijan military and enabling their aggression against Armenia?
We are clearly not enabling aggression, Senator. And as you know, we have had a relationship with them, and we have provided assistance in some cases, but in all cases, in-use monitoring is really important, and we've been focused on that. So we've taken a responsible approach to this, and again, we do not support, will not support aggressive activity. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Peters. Senator Mullen, please.
Thank you. Sorry, my mic almost came out there. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here. General Milley, I want to thank you again for the phone call and the conversation we had yesterday. I greatly appreciate your time on that. As we stated in that conversation, I wanted to have something for the record, and so before I begin with the rest of my questions, I'd like to touch base on the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan with American troops. Will you commit to providing a complete after-action report on the withdrawal to Congress that provides accountability and transparency for the American people, for the closure of lives that were lost and the people left behind?
Absolutely, and the Secretary of Defense has directed that we do that, and that is done by the Joint Staff and CENTCOM as well, but also the Department of Defense is doing that. So I absolutely commit to that.
Thank you. Generally, as you know, the industrial base is going through some changes right now. And prior to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine sites, invasion of Ukraine, sites like McAllister's Army Ammunition Plant were planning on seeing a decrease in productivity. And since this invasion, there's obviously been a new emphasis on where we're moving. And can you speak to what we're seeing with plants like McAllister and the ammunition depots, what the plan is and the future looks like for the industrial era?
Yeah, thanks, the Defense Industrial Base, Secretary's had several different sessions to include the DepSecDef and others within the department to really go over the Defense Industrial Base in some detail. One of the big lessons coming out of Ukraine is the incredible consumption of conventional munitions in the conduct of what is really a limited regional war. So a great power war, if that were to ever happen, God forbid it does, the consumption rates would be incredible. So the Secretary tasked us to go back and review all of the various operational plans and the COCOMs to determine if our estimates are correct, because it's those estimates then feed into these budgets to buy the ammunition. That study is ongoing. We can tell you that, for example, 155 ammunition, which is in high demand in the Ukraine fight, we report out daily in a written report to the Secretary of Defense on all the various ammunition statuses that we have. I won't go over that in an open session, but in a closed session, we can do that if you'd like. The bottom line is the Defense Industrial Base is critical to the defense of the United States, and our ability to produce and manufacture and produce the logistical capability, especially munitions, is fundamental. You mentioned McAllister. I had an opportunity to visit McAllister. That's an incredible facility with incredibly skilled workers that are highly motivated, and it is really a one-of type facility. It's an amazing place. Places like that exist elsewhere in the United States as well, and we need to pay great attention to that Defense Industrial Base if we're ever going to successfully compete and hopefully not actually have a war with a great power.
What's interesting is the relationship between the public and private service there at a lot of our industrial areas around the